Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is a special edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are so happy that you're a part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family, and we're so happy that you are here to help us celebrate the first night of Passover. To help us with that celebration, we'll be speaking with Joy Wieder about her beautiful book, The Passover Mouse. We will also be joined later in the show by Nadine Poper, our favorite school librarian. She's going to be sharing with us some great resources that parents and families can use during the quarantine. But right now, we are going to start our celebration of Passover with Joy Wieder. Joy, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
I am really excited to have you. We are publishing this episode on the 8th of April 2020, and this is the first day of Passover. So is it appropriate to say Happy Passover?
Yes, or Hag Sameach, either one.
All right, help me do that. Hag Sameach?
Hag Sameach.
Hag Sameach.
Yes.
Hag Sameach. Beautiful, beautiful. Hag Sameach, everyone. Well, why don't we begin by you telling us all about the Passover Mouse?
Okay. Well, the Passover Mouse is a picture book about Passover, and it's based on a passage from the Talmud. Do you know what the Talmud is?
I do. It is part of what we would call the Old Testament. Is that right?
Well, it's separate from the Old Testament. It's the where all the Jewish laws are written down.
Okay.
And then the rabbis are making commentaries on the laws, and that's all written down. And it's many, many volumes because there's lots of Jewish laws. And there's a volume that's just about Passover, because Passover also has a lot of laws to follow, including the fact that Jewish people should have no leavened bread in their home. It's called chametz.
And
that's
what
the Passover Mouse is about.
Is there a reason for that law?
Well, the Passover story is based on the Exodus, which is in the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. And that's the story of how the Jewish people were slaves under Pharaoh in Egypt. And when the Jews were freed, they had to leave so quickly they didn't have time to let their bread rise. And they had to bring unleavened bread with them out of Egypt. And that's why we only eat unleavened bread during the days of Passover.
So Passover, it's that remembrance of that time in Jewish life.
That's right. It's celebrating our freedom, our religious freedom.
Now, one of the things we hear a lot on the podcast is how important it is for kids to see themselves in the pages of a book. And I imagine that the Passover Mouse would be a wonderful book for a family to sit down, a Jewish family to sit down and read at Passover to start a conversation about Passover and about traditions. But I also think it would be a wonderful book for kids of every faith and kids of no faith to sit down and read, because it would help them get to know their Jewish neighbors a little bit better.
That's right. I think it's a great book both for Jewish families and non-Jewish families to learn more about the Passover traditions. The story is not exactly the Passover story about the Jews in Egypt, but it's about how Jews celebrate Passover. It's set in a shtetl, which is a Jewish village in Eastern Europe, and the story is about trying to rid your home of chametz and what might happen if you're trying to clean it all out and a little mouse might run into your house with some bread. And he creates havoc throughout the entire village.
Because he's bringing the leavened bread into the house.
That's right. And the question is, now that you've cleaned your house all out and this little mouse has run in with bread, do you have to clean it all over again? And the rabbis asked, well, what if the mouse runs in, but a mouse runs out with the bread? Do do you know if the bread is still left in your house, or did he bring it out of the house? So there's a big question, a conundrum that the rabbis discuss and come up with so many different scenarios. And then in the end, they can't even decide the question. So I decided I have to decide the question, and that's how I wrote the Passover Mouse.
Now, one of the things, because in Boston, we have a large Jewish community here in Boston, and I've attended many bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs and weddings and whatnot. So when I hear the term Passover, it's not new to me. When I hear the word Seder, it's something that I've heard before in rabbi, but not everybody may be familiar with these words. So tell us about who a rabbi is and what a Seder is and some of those other Passover traditions, please.
Sure, that's a great question. And actually, I include a glossary in the back of the Passover Mouse so I can explain some of those terms, because I'm sure that there will be readers that aren't familiar with that. So a rabbi is a Jewish religious leader, and in the days of the Talmud, they were great scholars who were discussing the laws back and forth. And we still continue to study what the rabbis of old have said about our Jewish traditions and apply them to our lives today. And this is a ceremonial meal that celebrates the traditions of Passover and teaches our kids about the Passover story and celebrates our deliverance from slavery.
Why is it, in your opinion, important for us to remind our kids and teach our kids history, whether it's Jewish history or Irish history or American history, whatever? Why is that so important that we share these lessons learned with our kids?
Oh, that's a great question. It's important to know your history and where you came from and pass down that knowledge to the new generations. There are still people who are enslaved today. There are people in areas of the world that aren't free. And it's important for our kids to empathize with those people. One of the traditions of the Seder is that this isn't something that happened to Jewish people thousands of years ago, that each Jewish person, it's as if we were brought out of Egypt. It's happening to us right now, every day. And we have to appreciate the freedoms that we have in this country and work to keep them free, to make sure that everyone is able to enjoy the freedoms in America. And that's why it's important to teach it to our children.
That's a really fascinating point, and the way you said it really kind of resonated with me, that it wasn't just those people who were held in bondage that were freed,
That's right.
But because they struggled and became free, it also freed us today.
That's right.
Yeah, fascinating. What inspired you to write the Passover Mouse and share this bit of fun Jewish history?
Sure. So I was actually writing a different book. It's called The Secret Tunnel, and it's set in ancient Jerusalem. And I had a scene where a family was celebrating a Seder at the time when the temple stood. And I wasn't sure how a Jewish family would celebrate Passover at that time. So that's why I was reading through the Talmud, and especially Tractate Pesachim, which is the volume about Passover. And I came across this passage of the rabbis discussing the possibility of a mouse running into a house with bread that had already been searched for chametz, and what would happen if a white mouse ran in but a black mouse ran out, and what would happen if a mouse ran in and a cat ran out. And it just popped into my head. I could see these crazy mice running through the village, creating havoc. And I just thought it was such a fun way of telling the story of Passover and of our Passover traditions.
That is really fun. You know, one of the things that and I hope I'm correct in thinking this, one of the things that I kind of love about Jewish culture is that it's okay to question and ask questions.
Oh, definitely. And questioning is part of the tradition. In fact, during the Seder, there's a part of the ceremony called the 4 questions, and we ask the youngest person at the table to ask those 4 questions. And in answering the questions, we're teaching the children about the Passover Seder and the Passover history. So it's definitely a tradition that's kind of baked in.
And one of the reasons I love that is because that you know, that license, that permission to question and question your religion, it's, you know, I don't think there's formal rules against it, but I know as I was growing up Catholic in Boston, I wasn't encouraged to ask a lot of questions about my religion and why is he spinning that thing with the smoke coming out of it, and why is this and why that, and why, if the Bible's saying this and we're doing that and it seems kind of contradictory. Now I love asking those questions, and I even love it when I make people angry when I ask those questions.
Yeah.
But I think asking questions is, if your faith isn't strong enough to hold up to questions, then maybe it shouldn't be your faith. And I think one way that we have a deeper understanding of our faith and our values is to question them and to talk about them.
Yes, I agree. And as I said, it's definitely baked into the Jewish tradition. I mean, even in biblical times, the forefathers of Judaism, Abraham even questions God when God is about to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham says, but what if I can find a certain amount of good people there? What will you do? So it's okay even to question God and to make your own decisions about what's right for yourself.
Now, you mentioned that during the Seder, the youngest person at the meal is asked to ask 4 questions. Are you able to share the 4 questions with us?
Oh, okay. So it starts with Manish Tana. Why is this night different from all other nights? And let's see if I can try and remember them. Why do we only eat unleavened bread on this night, as you asked before? Why do we dip our herbs twice? Because that's part of the ceremony. Why do we eat leaning to our left? Because the Romans would eat leaning to their left, and that's a sign of being free, because the slaves would serve them. And I can't remember what the 4th one is, but something around our traditions of the Seder. Maybe it's about the bitter herbs. Why do we eat bitter herbs on this night? I think that's the 4th question.
This is fascinating, and I love this. I would have loved to have been able to read this book with my kids when they were younger, because again, I think it's as a Christian, this is something that Jesus celebrated.
That's true. There was a Seder. Wasn't that the Last Supper was a Seder?
Yep, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, so I think it would give your kids a different perspective on what a Passover Seder is.
Yeah. One of the things, and we're going to be doing a special episode of the podcast with our friend Jonathan Rosen, particularly addressing anti-Semitism and how we might use children's books to kind of address and hopefully end anti-Semitism.
That would be wonderful.
What are your thoughts? How could a family use a book like The Passover Mouse to start a dialogue about respecting every person?
I think that is so important, and I think knowledge is the first step in accepting others, because a lot of times people are just afraid because they don't understand how act in the world. And that fear is what creates the hatred. Mm-hmm. So the more you understand and know about a person or a person's culture and heritage, the more empathy you have for that person and for their heritage. And that's the beginning of creating tolerance.
So very important. Now, I know the Passover Mouse is not your first book. You've written other books. In fact, you also wrote another book that has roots in Judaism called Shalom.
Yes, I think the Shalom book is really just a manuscript at this point, but I do have other Jewish children's books. The Secret Tunnel is one, and The Great Potato Plan is actually based on my family's history, and Let's Talk About the Sabbath. Those are the three other Jewish books I've written. But the Passover Mouse is my first picture book, so I'm calling it my debut picture book.
That's one. What inspired you to take on a picture book?
Well, I'm also an illustrator, and I love picture books. I did have a dummy created for this book, but when I sent it to my editor, she wanted to choose a different illustrator, and I really wanted to get this book out into the world, so I agreed, and I just love what Shahar Kober has done for the Passover Mouse. He created such a cute character and really brought all the villagers to life in my book.
You know, I have Irish roots, so I have to ask you about the Great Potato Plan.
Okay.
Tell me about that book, please.
So, as I said, it's based on my family history. They lived in Warsaw, Poland, and this is during World War I, and I always asked, how did you survive during the war? And their answer was that they would make potato kugel, which is a potato pudding, and cut it into squares, and my grandfather, who was a teenager at the time, would go out on the streets and sell it. And that's how they kept their family together during a wartime, and I wrote a book about that.
Wow. So important. It's obvious that sharing your family's history is important to you. It's obvious that sharing your culture and religion is important to you. Why is that? What drives that in you?
Oh, that's a great question. I really want my children to understand, and this generation to understand where they came from, because so many people behind them have made so many sacrifices for them to be able to have the wonderful lives that they have in this country. Especially for the Jewish people, it hasn't always been so wonderful to be able to express our religious freedoms. And we are able to do that here in America. And I don't want them to take that for granted.
Yeah, really, really, really important. Well, it's also important to let everybody know where they can go online to connect with Joy Wieder and find out about all the wonderful books that you've created.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I have a website. It's www.jnweeder.com. And I have a special website just for the Passover Mouse at www.thepassovermouse.com.
We've had such a wonderful time speaking to the author of The Passover Mouse and learning a little bit about Passover. And we're so happy to spend the first day of Passover speaking with Joy Wieder. Joy, thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful Passover with your family.
Thank you, Jedley. I really appreciate it. It's been so much fun.
And now, through the magic of technology, we'll be flying through cyberspace to the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania to welcome back our favorite school librarian, Nadine Poper. Nadine, how are you?
Oh, I'm great, Jed. I hope you're staying safe and healthy.
I am staying safe and healthy. We are socially distancing ourselves. Not from Augie. Augie's always on my lap, so hopefully we're not going to infect each other. But otherwise, we're taking all the precautions the government is asking us to take to stay safe, keep each other safe, keep ourselves safe. One of the reasons I'm so happy that you're on the show, Nadine, is that librarians are like human Google machines. If you have a question, you can go to a librarian, and most of the time they have the information right at the top of their heads, and if not, they know where they can find it. And we're coming to you because we're in this quarantine, and we're spending lots and lots of time by ourselves. School is out for 2, 3, 6 weeks, depending on where you are. Lots of families out there are going, what are we going to do? We want to spend quality time with our kids. We want our kids' education to continue, but we don't know where to go. So, Nadine, you have some great places we can go online where we can help keep that education going.
Yes, I do. I have some wonderful things that families can take
Great. So what's the first place you think we should check out today?
Well, the segment that we just recorded were for some read aloud, mostly picture books, fiction picture books. So today I'm going to switch over to a resource by Melissa Stewart. Now, Melissa is a phenomenal nonfiction mostly science writer for children, and she has some amazing books out there. So she has this wonderful resource where she has herself reading her nonfiction picture books. So it is Melissa Stewart, pretty much melissastewart.com, and that is spelled Melissa. That's how she spells Melissa, and then Stewart, Stewart. So on her site, she's got videos that go along with her nonfiction picture books. A lot of her nonfiction picture books deal around animals, but all kinds of other science concepts also. And she's got some amazing extra to go along with her books. And again, you're going to hear the books read either by her or with full permission from her and her publisher. So I would definitely check her out.
Yeah, we love Melissa. She's been a guest on the show. She is fantastic. And her website does have a ton of resources for families.
Absolutely.
Okay, anything else we should check out?
Yeah. How about, I just think this is so much fun. There is something called Storytime from Space. Have you heard of that, Jed?
I have not.
Well, these are astronauts that are reading aloud books from the International Space Station.
Wow, so cool.
It is very cool. And again, full copyright permission. So that website is easy to remember, just storytimefromspace.com. And there's several books on there. And what's really fun is they are on the International Space Station, so the children and the families will get a glimpse of the vehicle itself. And every story that they read has an outer space tone to it. So there's Mousetronaut Goes to Mars, for example, and you've got Add a Twist Scientist is being read aloud. Some of the other ones, Astronaut Annie. So that would be a fabulous, fabulous resource too. So get a little bit of a look at the International Space Station.
That is so cool. I am absolutely going to check that site out for myself right after we're finished. That's great. Hey, Nadine, remind everybody where they can go, because in addition to being a fantastic school librarian, my favorite school librarian, you also are an author of some great children's books. Remind everybody where they can go to find out about your books.
Oh, you can go to my website, which is NadinePoper.com. So that's NADINEPOPER. And actually NadinePoper.weebly.com. I always forget that Weebly in there. There's links there to my one book, Randall and Randall, and it's got an activity kit to go along with it, with all kinds of activity ideas to learn more about symbiotic relationships between animals, which is my one book is all about.
That is fantastic. Well, we've had a great time visiting with our favorite school librarian, Nadine Poper, sharing some great resources, some great websites where we can go and explore with our kids, well, any time of year, but especially now when we're spending extra time home with our kids. On melissastewart.com and also storytimefromspace.com. And if you like Melissa Stewart's website, you definitely want to check out her appearance on the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Nadine, thanks so much for being part of our show. Hey, please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Joe Spraga. He is the author of Freeble, the Frungle. Yeah, it's a fun book and a fun conversation that you don't want to miss. If you are the author of a wonderful children's book, you don't want to miss your opportunity to tell the world all about your book. And the best way to do that is by coming on the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Being a guest, it's fun, it's easy, and it gives you the chance to tell thousands of people about your fantastic book. All you need to do is go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com, click on the contact button, let us know about your great book. We'll let you know the next easy steps. We want to thank the folks who made today's show so very wonderful. Of course, we want to thank Joy Wieder. Be sure to check out the Passover Mouse. I want to thank my favorite school librarian, Nadine Poper. I want to thank my team, my producer, Fatima Khan, my author ambassador, Peggy Cotto. I want to thank my beautiful wife. And most of all, I want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And thank you so very, very much for all the love that you are showing to your family at this very, very stressful time. You are making the world a better and safer place by staying home and giving your kids all sorts of love. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.